I almost dropped my phone there. Okay. Today is April 15th. It's 11:45 p.m. Today I went to physiotherapy to get my thumb and wrist checked. Yeah. Annoying stuff. And then the other thing is, I do D&D, I think. Today was a really nice session. It was the end to the campaign that's been going on since the start of this academic year. It's sad because it's probably the last campaign. I really wanted to do more, but it is what it is, and I guess everyone's separating. I think it's time that I try to find a new D&D group, and I really want to DM, because that would be a great start to diving more into the story writing realm, because I like art and film directing, and when I think about I like art, it goes beyond just focusing on grand narratives and story writing, but the core motivation or where it all started was because I wanted to write a story. I wanted to write stories. So as much as I still want to explore the medium that goes beyond conventions, even this is, if you consider this art, this is a different sort of expression which strays away from typical story writing. Or is it really a story writing? You can see it that way, you can also not see it that way, who knows. But the point is, I do still enjoy story writing, so being a DM would be great. I already have a huge story and bunch of campaigns I've thought of, but we'll see. But today I'm here not because of what I was talking about. I wanted to do this video today because I'm in this philosophical mood. This happens when I'm taking philosophy courses, right? Last quad, not really, because I was just taking food and nutrition and molecular clinical genetics. Doesn't really get me into philosophy mood, especially because whenever there's even a bit of philosophy, usually it's in the form of ethics, but when there's a form of philosophy, it's so bland, and it's either cliche or is reductive the word? It really doesn't dive deep. The clinical genetics, talking about gene editing, does go a bit into the ethics of should we gene edit, and then there was this whole thing about teleology. I don't even remember. The teleology was against clinical genetics, I think, but I can't remember why. The thing is, I feel like teleology makes sense to be an argument for clinical genetics, right? Or CRISPR editing, because it's a form of the next step, our progression into better therapeutics, better manipulation of biology in a more succinct, safe, efficient way. So teleologically, I think CRISPR technology, when it comes to manipulation of the fetus, who knows, but Yeah, it's hard to tell. You know. I've been thinking about, okay, this is not what I wanted to go into, but just like one other thing, clinical genetics. I know like editing your gametes or the fetus is more ethically concerning, right? Because the whatever you edit gets passed on. But then I'm always wondering like, but if you make like somatic or like post fetal like genetic editing, if that's also possible, technically couldn't you say it doesn't really matter as much as long as you can do the same editing? Um, yeah, just a thought. Like I don't know why people never make this argument. I've never really heard of it, but it's something to consider. I don't know. I wish there's more development in clinical genetics so we can talk about this more, but it's fine. What I'm here, actually, is because I was listening to this podcast because I was in this philosophical mood. A BBC philosophy podcast, which, first of all, I was a bit reluctant. I don't want such an institutionalized source to, talk about philosophy. But it's like, it's fine. I'm just doing this for entertainment. So it doesn't even matter if I choose a topic that I don't care for or I completely disagree or find it ridiculous. Because, it's just there to explore, I guess. I know the irony is, like, a lot of my philosophy is based on my university, so that's a heavily institutionalized source. I think maybe even worse than BBC. But I want to say my university does kind of a good job. It's too left-wing. It doesn't allow you to have a neutral stance. So in that sense, like, but anyways, so I was listening to this BBC podcast while I'm biking, and the topic was on panpsychism. And I'm gonna try to recall the main points of panpsychism. First of all, panpsychism means the consciousness exists all around, like the universe is conscious, and not everything has to be conscious, but a lot of things contain consciousness. Even maybe certain, I'm not sure if it's certain objects are included, but then the universe, like the cosmos or whatever, there's a level of consciousness. But I think it also includes certain species that you wouldn't really consider conscious, like oysters, maybe even bacteria. But their argument is consciousness is not just human-centric or higher order, species with higher order thinking. It's everywhere. And then a way to describe consciousness, panpsychism, there's this 3 ways of arguing panpsychism. So that's panpsychism, that's one. The opposite of that is physicalism, was it? Which is observing the world through as it is, as matter, as material, not with any layer of like there must be some sort of intention or consciousness behind materials. And then there's a dualist, which is like a bit of both, a bit of physicalism and panpsychism. And the whole point, what I understood, is that and the other thing is that panpsychism, the argument there is that when we're looking at consciousness, the typical way of looking at consciousness, we begin, if you think of like a philosophical or scientific flowchart, we begin with understanding the material, understanding the biology and physical, and then moving on to describe consciousness based on that foundational context. And panpsychism is saying, why are we so biased with the physicalism of it all? Couldn't we look at consciousness as the foundation of the universe and then describe the materials and physics from the foundation of consciousness? That's what I understood. And then the whole idea behind panpsychism is that it sees the world through having a sort of intention, right? Or substance and meaning. That an object is not simply its form and function, but there's more to it, like almost a objective purpose, I want to say. And also, their argument is that science cannot really explain consciousness, right? The phenomenon of consciousness is indescribable. But if you look at the lens through panpsychism, where consciousness just is like a fundamental, all existing, omnipresent, like, substance, it's supposed to make more sense. Yeah, my description's already getting a little biased. I think this goes into an argument I've talked about before. How do I do this? So, if you know me, or if you've seen other videos of this, it's pretty clear I'm gonna critique it. I don't agree with it, and I think most people would even find it ridiculous. But an important thing I try to consider with philosophy, even though I'm absolutely stubborn with values and thoughts, and I'm probably not still going to take it in a biased way, I try to absorb or interact with values and philosophies that I don't subscribe to, or even sometimes I am fully against. I don't do this often, but from time to time maybe it's good to try. Although sometimes I think this might just help me dig a deeper trench in my philosophy and values. I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing. But yeah. But anyways. So, despite it probably being considered pretty ridiculous, and I already have a certain predisposition against philosophies like this, I want to still try to argue it as a credible philosophy. So, so going back to panpsychism, the whole intention is like there's some sort of objective substance with things, and there's like consciousness, purpose. One of the panpsychists is a theist, theist or either a theologist. I think both. Well, she said she was a theologist. I don't know if she's a theist. But one of her argument is that panpsychism can also function as a way to make theism make sense, especially pantheism, because it adds, it helps connect the point of consciousness, I guess, the purpose of consciousness, because the whole point is that consciousness is divine, or at least consciousness is part of the universe that creates purpose, and behind that is, a god that provide purpose, and I guess it manifests as consciousness that exists within the universe, as a universe as well. That's how I took it. But pantheism is supposed to be flexible, so it could fit into theism, but not necessarily. It could be seen as a more secular, scientific way. I didn't get the argument that the one argument I really couldn't argue is that even the physicalist view of consciousness, of it not being it is just a part of just matter, right? A product of matter. Consciousness isn't really matter, I would argue. But my trail of thought. Consciousness. Fuck. My brain just. Jesus, I can't remember what I was talking about. Conscious matter. So they're just saying, like, it makes sense, or it can make sense from a secular scientific view, because science hasn't been able to really explain it. If you look at the lens through consciousness and then explain matter and physics, it kind of works. But I think the issue, or what I want to critique, is and then the one argument I couldn't argue against is I do have a very more scientific what I want to say is more objective way of looking at consciousness. But technically, my view of consciousness and their view of consciousness is empirically equivalent. That's what they argued, which touche. Although it's more like a tie, right? It's a nice parry, but not even parry. It's like touche, but it's not. It's a parry. Because touche is a fencing term, right? I can't remember. But then I also feel like well, the whole thing I want to get to, but I don't know how. But the whole point is that panpsychism is like arguing against panpsychism is like arguing against religion, because religion is based on circular reasoning, and panpsychism is based on circular reasoning. You can't really deny something that sort of is claimed to exist but can't be proved to begin with, if that makes sense. It, but then like I want to say that my theory of consciousness is more empirically sound, like, yeah. Well, the whole thing is that I see panpsychism as it's heliocentrism. Um, there's too much value, and I just, to me, listening to their podcast or radio, there was just so much egoism in it, in the sense that there's just too much value on narcissism, or not narcissism, it is narcissism, but like too much value on what consciousness is. Like seeing consciousness as this big thing of this mystical almost, because their argument was like thought experiment about, I think, a philosophical zombie where a person can have all the functionalities that we have, but if they are not really thinking, if they lack the philosophical element of the brain, like they are just living to live, technically that's still a human with proper biological functions, but it's clearly lacking consciousness. It's a zombie, so to speak. But then, so therefore, consciousness is a sort of element that goes, sort of is a meta to simply the body, right? The mind is more than just the brain or neurons, so to speak. Because it could be there, but, you know. But then, the first thing is, like, this is a thought experiment. I would argue that if a person's acting like that, there are sort of medical issues underlying their philosophical zombie behavior. Which is also a theoretical argument, but the phenomenon of consciousness is part of our biology, right? We have evolved to be conscious because it's advantageous somehow. Or, I mean, somehow you could make so many arguments for the evolution of why consciousness is valued, or whatever. Like, to survive. Like, consciousness, one argument I have for consciousness is that it's a way of unifying the organism, right? A complex organism. I think without consciousness, it's hard, because that means you're taking away the ego. And if you lack that self-awareness, if you lack the awareness of your surroundings and, like, general awareness, how can you even function to begin with? That's my take. And then the whole point is they describe this consciousness as separate from simply the biology, right? But consciousness, what it ultimately is that it's an illusion, right? Illusion of unity. You have to think of it through like a constellation. I talked about this before. The ultimate point is you have to deconstruct it into smaller parts. And when you deconstruct it into smaller parts, it's neurons firing. Neurons firing simultaneously in specific regions to create the sensation of consciousness. It's like any other experience. It's like a sense, you know. When you touch fire, it burns, and you recognize that sensation. Consciousness is just less observable sensation because it's all happening in here. Or not really. How I see consciousness is it's an interplay of a lot of things that goes outside of the body as well. I think. But ultimately, like, the general like perception of what consciousness is, I guess, is mostly happening in here, maybe. Well, the phenomenon, the experience is it feels like it's happening in here. And it's not a simple thing as it just exists all of a sudden. It's a culmination of learning, a lot of learning, and interacting that help build the sensation of consciousness. But it's not a unified thing. It functions as a unity, but you can deconstruct it, just like any other material. It's not a material. It's just neurons firing. It's multiple neurons firing to create. And I'm just repeating myself. That's the point. It's not something you can physically circle around and say that it's that, you know, because it doesn't really exist. It's metaphysical in the sense that, you know, it's not really a thing. Like love. Love is, you know, it's still a chemical reaction. It doesn't, like, it doesn't diminish its existence. It's that the way we perceive it is a little misguided, I want to say. Misguided scientifically. Because it's not a thing that can exist outside, right? Like consciousness. It's a chemical reaction. And it's just that. And another thing I want to point out is, even if, like, the philosophical zombie argument, if consciousness is something beyond just the brain, I don't understand how that connects to the whole universe is conscious. Or an oyster can be conscious. I don't see the dots connecting there. It seems like a big leap. I feel like just because consciousness is separate from the human body doesn't mean everything else needs to be conscious either. Yeah, it just seems like we're centering the world around our consciousness when it's merely just part of a world. It's another phenomenon that happens, just like hurricanes, just like water. It just is. I think there's just putting too much of like intention, inherentness to something that's not inherent. Like nothing is inherent. That's the point. And there was a Descartes argument about they talked about subject and material or something. I mean, there are actual philosophers that's studying like Leeds or something. So they probably know more about Descartes than me. But I want to argue that they kind of misunderstood Descartes. The whole point of Descartes, is about like representation, right? It's subjectivity and how the way we perceive the world is through the lens of our subjectivity. And yeah, I read like an excerpt of an art text about Descartes, about like modernist art. And since like Descartes it created the philosophy of like self-perception, almost self-concept, introspection, that sort of thing, to look within and sort of understand that what we see is a representation of how we see it. I think like this Burger King cup, I see it as a Burger King cup because of how I see it through my mind. Someone from, I don't know, some tribe would see this and might not recognize this as a Burger King cup, or even a cup, or even what plastic is. And then fundamentally, this is not inherently a cup, because this ultimately is built off of atoms and quarks that are not intended to be part of a cup. Or this whole idea of, I don't know, I don't even see a cup as a cup. Like, if you try to see the world as they're all atoms or all quarks, none of them are really separate at all. They just exist. And that's the whole point, I think that I want to argue. There is layer, but the layers are simply what's observable. There's no layer of why. The why is there for story writers. But you can't bring that to science. Like, that notion is not scientific. And I understand their argument about science only shows how things are, or like the quantitative aspect, but doesn't like go into the philosophical aspect of like an ontology of anything. But like ontology, I mean, people have like like more theological, spectacular, ontological perception of reality. But mine is more, Nietzschean, enlightened. No, that's pretentious. But how I see is just ontology is what you observe. There's no. I'm just repeating myself. But yeah, it's just you can't. Philosophy works to, explain in the sense that, like the explaining through philosophy and explaining through science is different. They can come together in a certain way, but there's a certain distinction. Panpsychism, what it does is it's confused and it muddles philosophy and science together too much. Yeah. I think it's putting philosophy in the wrong parts of science. Like science, what's important is when philosophy should come in is, like, for example, ethics, right? Or the reason for conducting something, reason for researching something. There, in that sense, philosophy can use. Because ultimately, we're going into how it's going to impact others or our subjectivity, our values. Science matters when it involves people, right? But an ontology of object doesn't have to involve people. But then we're still, or not me, panpsychists are still trying to put philosophy into the object as itself, which doesn't make sense. I hope that made sense. Yeah. It's heliocentric. It's funny because I was thinking, like, I can title this video like Panpsychism is heliocentrism. Like it's yeah. And then I was thinking about that, and then they talk about, like, no, the current discourse on consciousness, or the common discourse on consciousness, is heliocentric. And panpsychism is Copernican, because they're seeing consciousness as not unique to humans, but is something everywhere. I thought that was an interesting way, but then that's still, putting consciousness on a pedestal. They still don't realize they put consciousness at the center. I mean, okay, they do realize that because they're doing that. But just they're centering consciousness when it's not at the center. It's really hard to argue because, I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like even I'm circular reasoning. I don't have empirical evidence in front of me, but I just feel my argument makes more sense. My argument's scientifically more sound because panpsychism is going into the more theological realm. It still is trying to explain inherent purpose, which is not. It just doesn't exist. I don't. Like, the issue is I feel like our science has developed enough to, like, end this discourse, to just what goes in against us, against just giving an answer, is that it's just certain values will be fucked. Theology will be fucked. It's just, I mean, as much as I'm like a physicalist, I don't want to use the term they're using. As much as I'm, what am I? Like, nihilist? Nihilist, like, I don't want to say nihilist, because nihilism is one part of a big philosophy you should subscribe to or keep as your value. Nihilism is just the foundation. I'm not a nihilist because nihilism, I'm not finished with nihilism, you know. And I'm not like an absurdist, because absurdist doesn't really deny theology per se. The whole point is that we just can't comprehend the true purpose of the universe, true point of our existence, which I would argue is still pretty theologian. No, I argue that it's pretty theist still, because it still assumes that there's some sort of power out there. There isn't power that gave you reason or whatever. It's just things are there because they just exist. There's no, you can't argue, well, like, putting purpose and intention inherent quality into objects is basically projecting our subjectivity. That's it. And I guess they kind of got me at the point that it's still empirically equivalent. I don't have any proper research to back this up, but I mean, it's scientifically sound, you know. Like, the thing is, like, as much as I like to have strong views and discuss philosophy, sometimes I'm just too lazy to really do my research. I think it's really out there. The answer is already out there. I think most people know it. I mean, honestly, it is upsetting. Mostly because, at least for me, I lived in a world where I thought heaven was real for a very long time, and then I realized that's not true. So, trying to live in a world where death means the end of it all is pretty disturbing. And to really conceive it is painful. I wonder if I was brought in a world, if I started from a secular place and just stayed secular, I wonder if I wouldn't be as so adverse to death compared to starting off as religious. I don't know. But the whole, like, purpose in life, like, that's fine. It's also interesting for me to develop and argue what the purpose of life is, because I mean, I see it from a subjective view, so that's why it could be so flexible to change, because it's never about what purpose has been bestowed upon me. It's about making your own purpose, and that could also mean to deny the idea of telos and purpose, and maybe just living. Fuck, it's getting cold. Just living and just breathing is enough living, you know. I was watching this video about relational aesthetics or relational art. And then these two relational artists were discussing, they're very anti-capitalist, and they were discussing about like in the current world, which they called post-utopian, which I don't understand, and I'm guessing they're referring to like Marxist utopia, but we're like, our class division's still pretty bad. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a lot less compared to the past. I mean, what was it that fuck, pop art guy, what the fuck was his name? Wrote an essay on him. Pop art guy. What the see, it's 12:30. I need to go to sleep. Pop art guy. Warhol. Jesus Christ. Warhol was talking about the great thing about capitalism is the richest person and the poorest people generally buy the same thing. So in that sense, I guess it's a bit utopian, but I don't know. And then why is it post now? Maybe because we have a level of awareness of it. I don't know. But that doesn't matter. The point was that he was arguing, like, in this current like cultural climate, like, to live, you need to have your needs met, right? But with capitalism, the needs have become so saturated. Like, you're constantly needing for something, and this, I think, relates to the consumer behavior, especially the American consumer behavior, where you have to just keep buying stuff, consuming. That's what helps drive the macroeconomic growth, right? That drives capitalism to keep going and going. And I guess that relates to a purpose, or a goal, not a goal, purpose, but more like goal. That this need is strongly correlated with our pursuit for goal, which I can understand this capitalist sentiment, because even Foucault was talking about how, like, we need to become our own entrepreneurs and our own capital, right? Capital makers. In that sense, it's like this whole hustling culture. It's about working towards something constantly. It's about building something. It's a goal. It's a goal. But then this relational artist was talking about, like, we should stop trying to reach a goal, you know, stop having to have needs, and that's how we can reach the right sort of world or something. I don't know, that, I mean, like, I try to make it make sense. I don't think it really, I mean, to an extent. The whole point is that there is wisdom in not necessarily pursuing a goal. But I don't know, like, I've thought about that quite a bit, but I've recently come to a conclusion, like, you don't have to. But I mean, if you're living, there are certain elements of life, could be due to biology, could be due to the society and how you learn things, that I feel that having like a distinct purpose and goal enriches life. And even if I try to stray away from it, I mean, I never really tried hard to stray away from it, but even if I like do or did or tried, it's not fulfilling. It's not enjoyable, and I know I made the argument in the past that like life isn't about enjoyment; it's about contentment. Which is also subjective. You can also break the layer down, but contentment isn't enough for me. Or to pursue contentment, I need to be happy. I need to strive for something. And I can also see how that can be destructive, or that could lead to more pain. But, you know, it's like the alternative just sounds not fun. Just, you know, kind of want to have fun. And no one's gonna say no to that, you know. I mean, that's a bad justification, because like you shouldn't be justifying based on like how people respond to your values, but the whole point is like, why not? So yeah, this was a very disorganized video. I mean, as always, I wanted to just focus on panpsychism. My main point that I keep repeating and repeating is that panpsychism is trying to look for something that's not there, which is purpose, that's bestowed upon, and the reality is that responsibility lies on your shoulder, and there's not, you know, much you can do. There's not much you can do. What am I talking about? That's it. But I do recognize the argument about empirically equivalent, that we both don't really have strong empirical evidence. However, I would argue that my point is based on empirical evidence. Huh? My view is more empirically sound, because it's not adding something that's not been proved. What my argument against panpsychism is that, you know, what we observe is what we observe. There's no layer to it. If, let's say, there was a scientific research that was, you know, reliable and replicable, is replicated and clearly showed statistically significant evidence that the universe is conscious, then sure, I am more inclined to believe in panpsychism. But what panpsychism does is it puts theories based on non-scientific observations, but mostly on emotions, on the need for a purpose that, or sort of higher power to, not feel like you're part of a void. It's fearing nihilism when nihilism is the first stepping stone to build philosophy. That's how I see it. That's my point. And this whole need for meaning and inherent meaning and purpose ultimately is putting humans at the center, because we have consciousness, and we're valuing it too much when consciousness is simply another phenomenon based on chemical reactions, but a complex one that creates the illusion that it's a one unified event, when it's multiple micro events, neurons firing, that culminate into an experience of unity. It's an illusion. It's not really an illusion, it's just the perception of consciousness, especially from panpsychist perspective, is seeing an illusory version of consciousness. Consciousness is just what I explained. That's it. I could have just said that and then ended the video in 5 minutes. But this is what I think. There's nothing. I guess to just reach the 1 hour mark. One last thing I really want to quickly talk about is, so I watched this little documentary about, this is also from my contemporary art class, a documentary actually against a lot of contemporary idea. One being, it talked about how beauty is not valued currently, and we need to bring back beauty because it does have moral quality. And then I'm not gonna go too much into the actual point of the video, but one thing they talked about is how beauty has been lost because of how much shock value today's society values. Shock, or just shock culture. It's just whole shock culture where you win when you can grab the attention of someone. And I have been, I know about it, I guess, but I never really thought about it that much, the ubiquity of shock culture. And I just realized how much everything is shock. Everything is shock. I know YouTube is able to ensnare me because of shock, or Instagram. That's why I delete Instagram. Thumbnails of YouTube, it's all about shock and tension, and that's also represented in art, and it's advertisements, everything. It's all has to do with grabbing your attention, because that moment someone grabs your attention, they win. That's how the world works now. And I guess part of it is because of capitalism, right? Part of it is because we function around utility, and I guess shock really works well to obtain utility. And probably also because of globalization, and especially with the internet, it's just oversaturation of everything means you need shock so that you stand out. And I don't know, shock, I mean, that's how the world works, but I have been kind of okay with it, but like currently I'm like disenchanted from the shock culture, and I really am not happy with how everything is shock. Maybe I could hopefully drown back in to not be bothered by it. But I guess now that I'm like disenchanted, I could try to utilize it as a tool better. One thing I realize is I don't know. I think there's certain social interactions that I want to grab attention, so I do use shock value, especially in the form of humor. But I realize I don't really utilize shock that much. I mean, like, these videos, case in point, yeah. And I don't know. I need to let my shock culture, my ruminants of shock culture, whatever it is, to, I think, still slow cook. I think it's cool because I have like these philosophical trends, and I feel like shock culture is a big one. I haven't really had it that much for a long time, so it's kind of also exciting of how I'm gonna deal with shock culture for a while. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe on the other side I'll come out as someone who starts editing these videos and editing thumbnails. That's not the person I want to be. That's not the purpose of these videos. I think the reason I'm so adverse with shock culture, and the reason I haven't really utilized shock as much, I think so. I could be wrong, but I don't think I really do. Or I have been for a while, at least. And that's all to deal with honesty, of how much I value honesty, even though I'm not much of an honest person. But I guess all I care about is admitting that sometimes. And like with the point about like being meta, like I think the reason why I really like Dan Harmon, at least from Harmontown and from Community, the way what I see from him is these characters, and then the way he talks about everything. It just seems honest. That's what I like about him a lot. And it's that, it's about being honest and valuing honesty. And shock is such a anti-honest behavior. It doesn't even really have substance, right? There's nothing to be dishonest about, even sometimes. But it is dishonest, because it doesn't care about what it is about. All it cares about is grabbing our attention. So that means you can lie, you can exaggerate, you can fudge the truth. Because as long as you grab the attention, you win. And that's very anti-honest. And I don't know why I'm so obsessed with honesty. I sometimes wonder, in middle school, in 6th grade, there was this teacher called Mr. Reynoso, I think. It was kind of weird. I was like a teacher's pet. And retrospectively, like, I was such a cringe kid. But he was a cool teacher, and I remember one thing he said was the most important thing is honesty. And it could be that that's the seed that has made me so obsessed with honesty even to this day. But it's also probably like throughout, you know, the short years I've lived here on Earth, something has led to valuing honesty even more. Or that maybe in a Pavlovian way, like being honest has brought good stuff in me. Or maybe I appreciate when someone's being honest. I felt, I think, fuck, I gotta end this. One thing about honesty that comes into mind is like relationship, right? Like romantic, or sexual. And I'm thinking about that, and like in the past romantic relationship I had, I want to say it's dishonest, but there's more to being honest than just not being dishonest, right? You can hide the truth, and that's still sort of not being honest. And the point is, like, sometimes the communication wasn't as open, and I compared that to when I had like a friends with benefits thing, because I just didn't give a fuck about any sort of relational consequence, kind of like as you would feel in an actual romantic relationship, right? Because it doesn't matter if I go out and go on other dates, and it doesn't matter if she goes out on other dates, because we're just friends who are having sex. I felt I was able to have a pretty honest relationship, I think, and that was like a fun relationship, and maybe that has made me more into honesty. That difference, the positive and negative reinforcement, maybe. And I just, also like Catcher in the Rye, I just remember. I became, actually maybe it's that, I didn't really fully, I don't know if I even finished the book, I usually never finish books like I had to read for school because I don't like reading books that much. But I remember one page, one scene. I think of it as scenes. I remember one scene where the protagonist is super adverse to phoniness. And I didn't know the word phony, so I searched it up. And then I became obsessed with recognizing phoniness. And honestly, I do that today too. I just absolutely hate phoniness, despite I'm probably phony, especially when I'm insecure. But I hate certain social environments that are muddled with phoniness. And that I don't know if it's Catcher in the Rye that made me feel that way or that I've already valued honesty, and that phoniness put a sort of tangible and visible frame around what's honest and what's not. And then ever since then, I've been more aware of it. It's hard to tell, but it could be a culmination of all that. And probably and I've had a lot of phony interactions. I just, and that's why I value honesty. I don't remember why I was talking about honesty. Shock culture, yeah. And I guess shock culture is now my new thing. Yeah, so I'll be exploring that. I think I talked about it last time too, but I just wanted to reiterate. But I really like the documentary. I don't fully agree. There's value in ugly and there's value in beauty. We shouldn't deny either of them, but there's definitely more shock. I mean, there's definitely more shock in the Western culture. That's the thing. When I watched the documentary, the first thing I thought was like, okay, yeah, beauty is lacking in the current art world, but not really current art world media and general culture, but not really, because that's a more Western thing. That's especially Europe, I feel, or like Netherlands, because there's a whole idea of liberation. I think Cult of Ugly is not just founded on shock culture of like it's also because the Cult of Ugly basically is abolishing tradition, abolishing power. Beauty standards are power, and it's tradition, and it's a way of oppression, not in the sense of just simply beautiful people oppressing ugly, but oppression in the sense that it creates a sort of aesthetic standards that meet for those who are able to make the aesthetic standards, i.e. those who are in power. And then so those who are not in power do not meet the aesthetic standards, even though it's subjective. So that's why it's like trying to put it on its head and valuing anything that would usually be deemed ugly. That's the point of Cult of the Ugly, right? But yeah, and I understand that, but there is good in beauty too. Like if you go back to Japan, you don't really see like overt sexualization, but in like a unhygienic way. I would say. Um, I hope that's not. I'm thinking of one thing, but I can see how those wordings can be interpreted in a very offensive way, but that's not what I mean. It's just, I don't know, just like, just, there's, well, like, if I'm being honest, I think this valorization of ugly has gotten to the point of throwing your dignity away. I understand that, you know, the argument I just made about the importance of cult of the ugly. But it's, I don't know. Maybe I am just still part of, like, being illusioned into understanding that there is a certain level of aesthetic beauty that is more objective. I mean, the fact that cult of the ugly exists means that it's ugly relative to a beauty standard, which, if ugly is kind of universally recognizable, the antithesis should have universally recognizable elements. And therefore, not every ugly thing is usurping power and tradition, I think. At least in Japan, you know, there's no that much of valorization of cult of the ugly. But it's not necessarily like trying to beautify. Is that the right terminology? It's not about like beautifying everything. But like the whole definition of tradition and beauty in Japan is also different. Like, there is so much value in Japanese tradition, but tradition isn't, not all of Japanese tradition is a representation of oppression. Like oppressive, like tradition, aesthetics, and oppressiveness. That the fact that these three sort of like strongly intermingling is a Western sentiment. I understand that Japanese traditional thoughts also include misogyny and lack of accepting the queer people, and other stuff. But tradition in Japan also includes a fucking bamboo getting bits of water taps and then sometimes going down and going back up, repeating, or like sand art, or like the quiet, like dignified practice of well, the tea ceremony, which it does include gender roles, but I don't. It's such a difficult there's dignity and beauty in tradition, at least in Japan. And I don't think every aspect of tradition in Japan needs to be usurped. In the same sense, I think there's elements of beauty and tradition, right? Objective beauty in the Western culture as well, I think. And not everything has to go against it, you know? And like the cult of ugly is also kind of radical, right? You always want to meet, you always want to meet in the middle is radical as well. But rule of thumb, if you're only going for ugly, then that's not good, I think. Yeah, okay. I'm getting really sleepy and I have morning classes tomorrow. I gotta stop. Yeah. I went on a rant. I just wanted to talk about Panpsychism. But, yeah. Thoughts. I don't even know what to title this. I'll title it Panpsychism is heliocentrism and Cult of the Ugly is too radical. Yeah.